This is Harsh Rules, I'm Ben Harsh, and today we're going to learn to play Tide of Iron, Next Wave. Tide of Iron is a medium-level tactical war game put out by 1A Games and Fantasy Flight Games. If you have the older Fantasy Flight Coffin Box version of Tide of Iron, this tutorial should work as well, since the components between the two games is essentially the same. The packaging is just different. Once again, Tide of Iron is a medium-level tactical war game. While it's not Advanced Squad Leader, it is a considerable step up from Memoir 44. If you're already grounded in light war games like Memoir 44, the transition here should be a lot easier. However, if this is your first time playing a tactical war game, Tide of Iron is not insurmountable. 1A Games utilized a layering approach in their instruction manual to teach this game. The game starts with the basic core mechanics and then layers on the additional gameplay aspects. I'll follow 1A Games' lead here, but I also wanted to integrate an additional aspect to this tutorial, which would be the boot camp. So get your bits together, people. It's time to go to boot camp. And with all new recruits, the first place to begin is the physical exam. Tide of Iron has two kinds of units: infantry and vehicles. We're going to start by looking at a regular infantry soldier. The key stats here are unit movements and the number of hexes the unit can move, the attack range, the number of hexes the unit can attack to, and firepower, the number of black dice you get to attack with. Now you'll notice the range and the firepower is divided in two. The first row is for stats against infantry, and the second row is for stats against vehicles. For example, if the infantry is fighting infantry, they only need to be 4 hexes away. But if they're fighting a tank, to do damage, they need to be very close, 1 hex away or adjacent. Okay, let's look at a vehicle. This is an M4A1 Sherman tank. Now the tank stat layout is very similar to the infantry layout, except for it has one additional statistic, and that is armor. Armor is the number of dice the unit can defend with against an attack. On top of all these stats, the Sherman tank in particular also has special abilities, which are outlined in the little gray box. So as you can see, with a medium-level tactical war game, there's a lot more stats to keep track of than in a light war game. And this is just 2 units. So now that you've been checked out on your unit stats, let's move to the next section. Let's put some of those stats to work in our little obstacle course. Here we have our Sherman tank and our new recruit ready to go through the obstacle course that will show you the different effects of terrain on movement. Our Sherman tank has a movement of 6, so they can move 6 hexes. Although our obstacle course includes hexes that require additional points to enter. The first obstacle is rough terrain, and you can see this doesn't really slow the tank down. The tank is able to navigate rough terrain at the same cost as a clear area. However, the rough terrain does slow down a recruit, and it costs him 2 points to enter a rough terrain hex. Our next obstacle is the woods. So you can see our Sherman tank does not do as well in the woods. It costs him 3 points to enter the woods. Our raw recruit at the bottom does not have enough movement points to enter the woods on this turn. This is a key point because it requires movement points to enter the hex, and if you don't have enough movement points, you can't enter. Okay, let's pretend this is the next turn. So our infantryman can move into the woods now. It costs him 2 points and 1 point to move out of the woods. And then once again, he's used up his points and he's done. Our Sherman tank at the top has approached a stream and is ready to cross. Streams can have different depths depending on the scenario. This stream is shallow, which allows vehicles to cross. Anything deeper, vehicles are prohibited from crossing. However, to enter a shallow stream hex, a unit must pay 4 movement points. So we have just enough movement points to get into the stream and out again. Our infantry recruit at the bottom is able to cross the stream with little trouble, and now he stands at the base of the hills. The rule of thumb with infantry is if you see a hex with special terrain, it's going to cost you 2 movement points. Vehicles, as you see, are a little more complicated. So for hills, our Sherman tank is going to spend 2 movement points to move up to the first hill. Once on top of the first hill, the Sherman tank can then proceed to the second level hill. A unit must always ascend to a level 1 hill before they can climb to a level 2 hill. Level 2 hills are too steep to climb from the ground. Our raw infantry recruit clambers up the first hill for 2 movement points and then clambers up to the second level hill for another 2 points. Meanwhile, our tank is able to descend the hills quickly and exit the course. Hills are a little bit complicated because it costs 2 to climb each level, but then once you're at the top, it's a normal 1 movement at the same level and a 1 to move down a level. Now that we're familiar with the terrain, our next stop in boot camp is the rifle range. It's time for our recruit to learn how to shoot. Quick review of the stats: an infantryman has a range of 4 against other infantry. In the diagram, you can see this breaks down into 4 types of range finding. You have close range, which is 1 hex away. Infantry has a firepower of 1 against infantry. So in this situation, you get to throw 1 dice, and to kill this unit, you would need to roll a 4 or 5 or a 6 at close range. Farther out is normal range, which is 4 hexes. So in this situation, you'd roll 1 dice, and to kill this unit, you would need to roll a 5 or a 6. If your target is farther out, you can attempt to make a long range shot. The long range is basically up to double your normal range. And if your range stat is 4, that means you have a long range of 8. On a long range shot, you'd roll your dice, and you need a 6 to hit. If the target is any farther out, they're out of range, and you're not able to make an attempt to hit them. Now that's stationary shooting. You can also conduct fire and movement. Now fire and movement has penalties. If you move and then fire, you get -1 to your total movement. Your firepower is cut in half, and you're no longer able to take long-range shots. You also must choose. You can run and then conduct your shot, or you can shoot and then run, but you can't break it up. Now most vehicles have armor, infantry do not, so therefore they need to seek cover. Now I've placed some German targets in various types of cover to show you how this works. Cover essentially gives you more defense dice to roll against attack. So in our first example, if the recruit shoots at the Germans on the bridge, he gets to roll 1 attack dice, and to hit he needs to get a 5 or 6. But the Germans can roll 1 defense dice, and if they roll a 5 or a 6, they deflect his shot. The other forms of cover follow this pattern. So woods provide 2 defense dice, sandbags provide 2 defense dice. If they're in a house, they get 3 defense dice, and if they're in a fortified pillbox, they get 6 defense dice. Now you can see how it can be so difficult for one infantryman to take a position. Fortunately, these infantrymen are usually grouped into squads of 4. This will give them a minimum of 4 attack dice, but we'll cover squads a little bit later. In this diagram, I want to show you the differences between infantry and vehicles and how they interact with each other on the battlefield. Our M4 tank has a range of 5 against infantry and 8 against other vehicles. If the M4 takes a shot at the German infantryman, they get to use 8 attack dice, and the German has no cover, so he does not get to try to deflect any of those. If the M4 takes a shot at the German tank, they get to use 10 attack dice, but the German tank has an armor of 4. So the German tank can roll 4 defense dice to see how many hits they can deflect. Now infantry, it's a lot harder. The infantryman needs to get in very close range with the tank to roll 1 attack dice against the tank's 4 defense dice of armor. If the infantryman takes a shot at the German soldier, he gets to roll 1 dice, and there's no defense from the German soldier. Finally, let's cover line of sight. Here are the basic concepts. Line of sight is measured from the center of the attacker's hex to the center of the target's hex. This is represented by the center yellow line. Now drawing a line above and below this determines whether the line of sight is clear. If at any time the top or the bottom line touches terrain that blocks line of sight, the shot is blocked. If one line touches, you're still okay, but if two lines touch, then your shot is blocked. Now that you've learned to move and shoot, boot camp is over. Congratulations. Now let's put some of these learnings to the test in a regular scenario. For this tutorial, we will use the introductory scenario, Mons Again. Here is the World War II, September 3rd, 1944. The Belgian fortress city of Mons was the site of one of the first battles of World War I. Now, almost exactly 30 years later, the two SS Panzer Corps and the American 7 Corps are about to collide. Mons Again. Scenario design by Craig Robertson. The objective, destroy opponents by the 4th round. Representing the 7 Corps are 5 M4A1 Sherman tanks and 1 M10 tank. And representing the 2 SS Panzer Corps are 2 Tiger I tanks and 2 Panzer IV tanks. The 7 Corps begins on the west side of the forest. The 2 SS Panzer Corps are clustered behind several hills, and Ben Harsh is keeping his day job as a mild-mannered Fortune 500 company employee. So anyway, let's set up the scenario Mons Again. In step 1, you're going to place map boards 7B, 11B, and 2B as you see here. In step 2, you're going to place the round track and place the round marker on number 1. In step 3, you're going to place the American units in the tiles I've highlighted here. And in step 4, you're going to place the German units in their highlighted tiles. In step 5, you're going to place the game tokens for fatigue, light damage, and heavy damage, as well as putting out the dice. In step 6, you're going to put the rifle on the German side since they start with the initiative. So we have all the components we need for the first game. Let's play Mons Again. For this introductory scenario, we're only going to use the action phase. Each player will conduct 2 actions and then pass the rifle. For the 2 SS Panzer Corps' first action, I am going to activate Tiger I at the top and the Panzer IV tank below it. Now you might have noticed a bunch of different symbols appear on the screen. Basically, I've created these symbols to help me remember all the statistics. Maybe I'm just getting old, or maybe you're just smarter than me, but I need help to remember all this stuff. If you look at the legend in the corner of the screen, it will define them. So the tire is move, the shield is armor, the crosshairs is range, and the little explosion is firepower. They help me, so hopefully they can help you. Moving right along, here's the spectrum of actions I can take with these 2 units. In this introductory game, I have 4 options. I can use concentrated fire that's linked. This means my attacking unit with line of sight can get an additional half firepower from the second unit. So in this example, if I had line of sight to the enemy, I could make a shot with 18 attack dice. I know you're thinking, 18? Yeah, this game should have been called Tide of Dice. On the flip side, if my Panzer had line of sight and did a linked fire, they could make an attack with 16 attack dice. However, if I do this, both of my units would be fatigued for this turn. Every time you use a unit, they become fatigued, and you can't use them again until the next round. Or I could just use individual concentrated fire, where I do not move and I fire at the enemy. I can perform fire and movement with a penalty of -2 to my movement and half firepower that allow me to move and fire. Or, finally, I can use advance, which allows me to move only. So for my opening move, I am going to conduct an advance with my Tiger and a fire and movement with my Panzer. So this is what it looks like. I will be moving my Tiger around the hill and down to the edge of the forest. That uses up 4 movement points, but I'm going to stop at the edge of the forest and my unit will become fatigued. My Panzer will also use 4 movement points and move around the hill to sit next to my Tiger. Now I've chosen fire movement, so I've lost 2 movement points from the beginning. So I used up all my movement and now I'm ready to fire. So I'm going to draw a line of sight here. The shot looks good and I'm going to roll 5 dice. The M10 has an armor of 4, so they get to roll 4 defense dice to see if their armor deflects my shot. The Panzer Corps rolls their 5 dice and they get 2 hits, and the M10 rolls its defense dice and doesn't deflect anything. Since we've scored 2 hits, let's look and see how vehicle damage works. So 1 to 2 hits is considered light damage. What that means is that they lose 1 movement point and they lose 1 armor point. If you score 3 hits, the vehicle is heavily damaged. They cannot move, they still have -1 armor, and their firepower is cut in half. If you score 4 hits, the vehicle is destroyed and removed from the game. So the M10 has sustained light damage. They have -1 to their armor now, and -1 to their movement. So we place the light damage marker next to the M10 to help us remember, and we place the fatigued unit markers next to our 2 units since they've had their turn. Now the Germans will pass the rifle over to the American side and they will take 2 actions. You're going to keep passing the rifle back and forth until all units are fatigued. Then you start a new round and you do it again. In this scenario, if by the time 4 rounds pass, if you haven't destroyed one side or the other, then the game is over. I'm going to stop here and let you guys play through this so you get the hang of it. For your second game, you're going to play Mons again. For the second game, we're going to layer in command cards. And command cards create an additional element to the particular scenario. There are several different command cards, but the card for this scenario is Heavy Fog, and this allows all units to gain 1 cover unless they are fatigued. So we're going to implement our little fog graphic here, and then the rest of the game plays exactly the same. For your third game, you're going to play Mons again. For this third game, you're going to get an additional action called Opportunity Fire. Let's take a look at that. Opportunity Fire basically allows you to place a unit at the ready so that if another enemy unit passes within their line of sight, they can immediately attack. So for example, in this diagram, I've placed the Tiger 1 tank in Opportunity Fire mode. If any enemy unit enters my green hexes that I have outlined here, I can make an attack immediately. So let's say during the 7 Corps' turn, the player moves their M10 into one of those green zones. The Tiger tank immediately fires, and it gets to attack with 13 dice because that's its firepower. The M10 has 4 armor, so it gets to roll 4 defense dice. So of all those 13 dice, the Tiger scores 6 hits. The American rolls with their 4 dice and they roll 3 deflects. So we run our little damage equation. 6 hits minus 3 deflects equals 3 solid hits, which equals heavily damaged. The M10 stops right where it's at. So once you've conducted Opportunity Fire, the Tiger now becomes fatigued. And then you continue with the gameplay. At the beginning of the next round, you'll need to decide whether you're going to remove that Tiger from Opportunity Fire or you're going to continue a new Opportunity Fire phase. But by adding Opportunity Fire to the third game, you can see how this changes the strategy quite a bit. And that concludes part 1 of our Tide of Iron tutorial. In the next episode, we'll look into integrating squads into the game. Until then, I'm Ben Harsh, this is Harsh Rules, and I'll see you on the next episode.